Pat Windrow at the Cable Easel with the program which is devoted to painting and drawing from life. And when I don't bring a still life into the studio, or flowers or fruits and things, I go out with a crew of one and shoot a scene of the local environment of your viewing area, and then work from that monitor here in the studio, which is about the closest you can get to being out of doors. If you look closely, many times you'll see a lot of movement, the water, the wind blowing leaves, and people walking across. And the shot today is done in a rather remarkable and beautiful part of Long Island, which is known as this is a little tributary of the great river in Oakdale. There are canals, man-made canals built everywhere, but every once in a while there is a natural little rivulet that goes into the great river, and it's really quite remarkable. It's just a wonderful little nook of this amazing island, and it's also not too far away from Dowling College, and anybody who knows the area may or may not recognize this little beautiful spot, which is off Shore Road. I believe it's called, or Shore Drive. I think that's probably more like it. And here's the shot. The spring has just barely begun to manifest itself in a few little, well, whispers of pale green, but for the most part, it's still kind of sleeping. The winter is having a hard time leaving us. Anyway, starting with a perfectly blank canvas, as I usually do, and believing that the only way to get a composition is to lay it out from the beginning, I'm going to start with what I call my very small liner brush, and I'm going to lay it out with what is known in my trade as dirty turpentine. I don't use charcoal, it makes a mess. So here I'm going to give you the diagonal, which is the interesting part of any landscape because it leads the eye towards the center, or towards a focal point in the picture. The horizon line is going to be trees, so it's not going to be flat. But here is the land mass in the going off into the distance, and here is the layout of the horizon line. It would, or if we were at sea, it would be a perfectly straight line of the horizon, which is where the word comes from, horizontal. But here the horizon line is designated by the line of trees. The composition is the kind that I really like because it has some interest on both sides of the composition, but it also has a lot of interesting things going on in the foreground. The foreground can make or break a picture, and hopefully whenever I do these things, the foreground manages to work nicely enough so that the picture is an interesting and mysterious kind of a composition. Here is the water line. There's a little something going on in the water down there, but the major thrust of interest in this one is going to be this large growth of wonderful Long Island cedars. These cedars are one of the favorite growths here to me. They're found at the beach, they're found in wild areas, they're found of course among a great deal of poison ivy, but they are definitely native to the island, and they will enable anybody who sees these paintings to say, ah, those cedars tell me one thing, that this is definitely a Long Island scene. So whenever the cedars are around, I always kind of slam the brakes on in the car and say, this is it, this is where we're going to stop for this particular study. So here are three of them. Mozart was right. He said anything in threes will work. And so here are these three wonderful cedars with a few leafless branches in the interrupting them here, but for the most part this composition is just about all one would need to do to start applying paint to canvas. So if you were to really analyze this, you would see that this could be called a single line, so that's a one line. Here's two, here's three, here's four lines, and here is, if you could made this a continuous line, 5, 6, 7, a 7-line composition. The rest of it is technique, but there is no way of being able to deal with anything unless you compose it. It happens in the kitchen as well as in the way you plan a vacation or the way you plan anything. You must have a plan. Here's the plan. Now, the application of paint has got to do with technique and also the ability to understand the color that you're looking at. I work as a realist, and therefore the color that I use is as close to the real thing as I can get. I also many times will mix color on the canvas for the reason that I like to demonstrate that if you're out in the wild, or that you have gone and carried a whole lot of equipment with you to a given site, you want to keep it as minimal as possible. That's heavy stuff, and so a palette can just get in the way. I will mix color on the canvas without any problem, and if I need to mix color of complex proportions, I will mix it down here, and when the painting is over, scrape off all the extra and kind of use it or dispose of it. But here is my palette, and as you can observe from this composition, that the color of the sky is extremely pale down at the horizon, which means that you mix the pale color first, and then you're going to work yourself gradually up towards where it becomes darker. The need to observe this comes when you're out there in the field and you really look at what you're seeing and you say, okay, the sky is paler as it's towards the horizon. Now, laying this out with this palette knife means that I can work very quickly and that I can keep the color extremely clean. The palette knife is not like a brush. It does not hold color in it and mess you up with a lot of need to rinse out as you do with brushes, but you have the ability to get an absolutely clean palette knife merely by wiping it sometimes only once with a cloth. So I'm mixing the darker color now. This technique is interesting to an awful lot of people because there is a great deal of texture involved with the paint, and some people love to see a heavily impasto technique of paint, and I agree that there is something quite wonderful about being able to look at a painting and see the strokes that were made. I think I'm kind of satisfied with this color for the top part, and then will come the need to blend it as you go further down. That can be done in a number of ways. That can be done either leave it rough, leave the blending extremely rough so that you actually see where the two colors do either overlap or blend with each other, or you can do it by applying a brush and do a very smooth blending. It's a question of taste, and it's also how the painter feels about it as he goes along, or he or she or it, whatever. And the application of this color can be done almost as flat tones, and then the details can be put on later. But the point is that if you're out there working, and the day that this particular scene was shot, there was an unusual front that came in. It was extremely cold, and this is, as the spring is now into its first week, the wind was whipping and cold, and so the need to work quickly would dictate the manner in which you apply the paint. So being able to apply this color with any kind of rapidity is going to be very, very beneficial as you find yourself subjecting yourself to the elements, namely the cold and the wind, and sometimes even extremely hot conditions. On days such as this, the wearing of a hat is not necessary, but it certainly is many times in summertime to not go out there and deliberately get yourself in a bad situation with too much sun. Well, here we have, I think I will not blend this down too smoothly. I can show you, demonstrate to you how you could do that. This is a a blending brush, and some of the areas where the color has actually, become a little bit rough, you can blend between the two. You get rid of the texture, but I must show you everything I can while these programs are on, and then you can make your choice later. Here is getting rid of some of the rougher areas. I rather like them, but the other way works also. So it all depends upon how you personally feel about the texture of a painting. I'm going to be using quick drying white here on my palette, and this is two piles of paint. This is ordinary white, titanium white, and this is MG's quick drying white, which means that I'm very fond of this because you can apply color directly over another one very quickly, and it does in fact cooperate very nicely. The arrangement of clouds can be done in a very interpretive way. You can pull your cloud over on the surface of the paint, and nobody is going to argue with you about the shape of it, because by the time you have finished doing this, that cloud will probably have changed shape. So what you're doing is actually the impression of a cloud, but the placement of it is what is interesting to me. Somehow, when you work from life, you find yourself relying tremendously on life itself to give you the spontaneous arrangement, and we all can understand how spontaneous cloud arrangements are. There is a cloud arrangement here in the distance, near the horizon, just a little suggestion of clouds back there, and then there's a little stray one over here, up in the darker part of the blue, and all of these observations are done out there. So anyone who feels that working from life out there is difficult, I can assure you that it is far easier than it is to try to remember what it is that you might have seen at one time and try to rely upon your memory. Working from life is not only a great deal more interesting, but it also is extremely easier, much easier, which comes as a surprise to a lot of people. Anyway, there is the arrangement of clouds. That looks as though it might in fact be pretty much what I saw there, and what this camera picked up, maybe just a little bit more. We can put some more white on this later and to make it more brilliant, but for the time being, let us just concentrate on that part. Now, as I said earlier, the spring is having a hard time getting itself in gear, and so there is. I'm going to change techniques here, and I'm going to start using a brush technique. In the distance, there is the manifestation of some graying and some little bit of greening as the season progresses, but it's all a little bit diffused at this point. There is no real evidence of green except once in a while, and it's kind of what you might say extremely subtle way back there. Because it's still kind of in the darkness of the winter. In my opinion, this has been an extremely difficult and not very inspiring winter. I found it extremely dark and gray and dismal and dreary and cold and wet and so on, and I cannot emphasize how glad I am that that particular season is finally coming to an end. I'm introducing some, well, let me see, a little bit of mauve in there wouldn't hurt any either, because the distance is somewhat hazy. It's not necessarily really green. It's got some mauve in it, and as you can see from the monitor, the lack of foliage is giving well, it's a distance color. I call this definitely a distance color. I'm going to add some more detail later, but this is what I'm preparing as the background to receive a slightly more detailed growth of trees in the distance. All of these things have to be treated like backgrounds. And I talk about that quite often, because you do not begin to apply the detail until you've prepared yourself for putting the detail on top of it. Painting is almost layering, and layers of color have to be put on. That's why when I'm painting out in public and people stop by to see what I'm doing, they don't really understand until I get to the point of putting the details that I have prepared the areas for the details. And by telling you that, I will show you exactly what I mean. That is merely a background for what is going to come now. and consulting the monitor and or the scene that I'm doing, there is a rather bright. Well, I need a little bit of white in there. There's a rather bright pale green. It probably is some sort of a wonderful willow that is decided that it's waited long enough and it's now going to be the first one to bloom, and so it's brighter than the others, and it's finally gotten a nice pale color of spring. Because Long Island has these wonderful these evergreen cedars, I'm going to show you that cedars in the distance are also extremely telling. Oh, too dark. Lighten the whole thing. You have to make sure that the focus of color is equally as important as the focus of size, because things in the distance tend to be much paler than the ones in the foreground. You have to be able to have somewhere to go, and there's apparently some wonderful cedars. I believe that the Arboretum is not far from here. We may just be looking on part of the tremendous amount of acreage that the Arboretum occupies down there in Oakdale. Wonderful part of the world. When it is open, everyone ought to really make a tremendous effort to get down there and see the collection of trees and the collection of plants all here in a public park. It is closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, which can be frustrating if you go down there and expect to find it open, but just call up. There is a service. You can probably get some information from anybody on the phone at any time about going and visiting the Bayard Cutting Arboretum, and that's the long name for it. Well, as I'm doing this, I find that I'm going to take a very short break. I need to sort of consult my palette, so I'll be right back. Don't go too far away. Back again with this nice little study. This is a wonderful study of this charming spot down there in Oakdale. I'm working on the background because, as everybody knows, I work from the background towards the foreground. So everything is done in layers coming forward from way far away. This way far away is a rather large area of, well, not unspoiled landscape, but certainly not developed. There isn't a sign of human habitation in this background that I'm doing here, and so you can see that this is a wonderful area in which you can do nature studies and not have to worry about the intrusion of houses and architectural presences and well, all sorts of things like cars and buses and trains and telephone wires. There is not a phone wire in sight, as you can see, which of course in this day and age is rather difficult to find. You know perfectly well that there are in fact phone wires just about everywhere, especially in an area that's as populated as Long Island. They just hang out all over the place. Well, here in the so-called background are two apparently very nice pairs of of cedars. I believe they're cedars. They could be something else. They could be white pine, but they look like cedars to me, and they have a little bit more depth to them. And then I'm going to take my favorite little very, very thin brush, and I'm going to introduce very subtly whatever it is is supporting this growth. Such as here, you've got to make an indication that somewhere there is something that is supporting that tree. It can't just be kind of an amorphous little yellow cloud of stuff. It's got to be clear that there's something is happening to hold that all up. And here are some more. There's a little suggestion here of another trunk, and as you can see, looking very closely on some of these, if you're out there, you can focus on these areas of detail which have to be put in, but not to concentrate it on. They have to be very subtly done, and they have to just sort of be suggested. Otherwise, it becomes too busy in the distance, and then you will have nowhere to go when you come to the foreground. So all of these little details come in first before I'm going to work on that embankment of apparently Riverside grasses and well, jack-in-the-pulpits and all sorts of other wonderful growing things that are native to the water areas around here. So these little subtle things here tell you that there is something happening in the distance. Let me see what happens here. Let's pull this little bunch of cedars down a little bit further, because the area below that is going to be my river grasses, and all of these things are really wonderful to work on. You've got it all here, right down the road a piece from where you live. I'm sure that anybody who has driven by in Oakdale knows very well that this is a very special area. I know that the taxes are probably staggering, and that not everybody in the world can afford to live there, but there are little roads and bypasses that you can drive down and become a part of the observation of this extraordinary area, namely the South Shore of Long Island, to which we now go with our cable network. So here we have the introduction of some of these river grasses. They are still sort of in their, well, they haven't turned green yet, but that's what makes the color scheme rather intriguing. Actually, very intriguing to me. The greens and the ambers and the siennas of the wintertime all blend in the spring, and you get this, you get a sort of, well, it's not an Easter egg color scheme, but it certainly is quite wonderful to see that not everything yet has turned absolutely green. In a couple of weeks, this scene will first of all be unrecognizable because it will be so incredibly overgrown. And there will also be these pale amber-toned grasses will be gone. They will be replaced by very vibrant green things that grow by the river. All sorts of wonderful things, not Spartina grass, because that's, I think, reserved for the beach areas. But there must be a tremendous number of native grasses that are growing along these rivers here. And they will turn brilliant green in a matter of, well, maybe days, probably more likely weeks. So when you do these things, and when you investigate the areas that are so picturesque here, you also can't help but become interested, and your curiosity is aroused about what is it that I'm looking at rather. What is it that all these things are? They can't just be grasses and just green things. They have to have some wonderful story behind them, that they are native grasses, or they've been brought here, they've been introduced here, like the Norway maple is not a native tree, but it's everywhere. And then at the Bayard Cutting Arboretum, which is not far from here, there is a collection of remarkable trees from everywhere, from the Orient and from here. And I'm going to be doing a show very soon about that particular place that is open to the public and that is cared for with some very knowledgeable people, and preserving. Not just animals are getting preserved in this day, but there are also these trees, which of course the sad news that the dogwoods are beginning to have some very questionable future. The dogwoods seem to be in trouble, and I don't know whether or not that's nature's way of well, disposing of one species to make room for another. I personally will be very unhappy if the dogwoods, in fact, are in trouble. I heard a long program the other day about how they are, in fact, really, it's spreading. It's going as far south as Georgia and Alabama, and we may find the time when our dogwoods are going to be maybe just a memory, except possibly for the places like the Arboretum. However, if there is a fungus in the air that is being carried by the winds, I'm not sure that any preservation is possible. I would appreciate if anybody knows more about it that they tell me, and then I will be more informed, and if I'm informed, then maybe I can talk about it with a little bit more clarity. There is a lot of not wonderful darkness down here, probably because this is in the process of turning from dark to pale, but it also may be the shadow that these grasses are casting in this dark depth near the water. But it's a wonderful, great, rich, dark line underneath here, against which the brilliance of the water is going to be able to be manifested. Now, the brilliance of the water is evident right here, way off in the distance. I'm going to mix a little bit on my palette here, which is not really a palette. It's acting as a palette, but it's an old canvas board. And here is this wonderful, brilliant blue swipe of color back there that is obviously reflecting the sky, and then the water gets dark a little bit later as it begins to pick up reflections from the grasses and from the trees. But this nice brilliant area here is going to give us maybe a very watery feeling as we go along. I'm going to be running out of time in a little while. This is, of course, part one of the study of this little riverside place in Oakdale. I always do these studies in part two, because there is no way of being able to do anything really commendable in any shorter period of time. So I'm working on this reflection here now on what it is that happens to the river. But as I close on this one, please do tune in for the conclusion of this little study. I think that maybe before we really run out of time, I'm going to just tease you along like the news does, you know, news at 11. The world is in a disaster, news at 11. I'm going to just introduce here the beginning of this cedar. And so that when you tune in the next time, you'll see me pick up from here. Once again, I'm so pleased to be able to be bringing you these wonderful local studies of the place in which we live. And I have lived here for many, many years. I am now relocated in Virginia, but I do come back especially to do this program. And every time I come, I realize the wealth of paintable places around here. No wonder I hung around for 30 years. I found wherever I turn, there is a place to paint. Well, that's it. I'm glad that you watched this. I hope that it brought some information to you and that you'll tune in for part two of my little Riverside scene. This is me, Pat Windrow, saying bye-bye.